a biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Welcome back to 2020. My name is Wendy Francis and I'm your host this week, filling in for Neil Johnson. Now, my first guest this morning is pastor, commentator, national consultant for churches and Christian schools, and he's also an award-winning Christian author. I know that, and I can recommend his books because they are on my bookcase, and I have also bought them for my older grandchildren. So for any grandparents out there, these books I recommend: Being the Bad Guys, How to Live for Jesus in a World That Says You Shouldn't, and another one is Future Proof, How to Live for Jesus in a Culture That Keeps on Changing. Stephen, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Wendy. Yeah.
So good to have you. I checked with him before, everybody, whether I can call him Stephen or Steve, and he was happy with both, so I might alternate whether I'm happy with him or not. You'll be able to tell by Stephen or Steve. But look, Steve, can I thank you at the start for your cutting-edge social commentary? And it is cutting-edge, but I appreciate that. I appreciate your commitment to biblical truth, but I also, and perhaps particularly, I would say, I appreciate the gracious way that you do share that truth. It's always in grace. You often talk while you walk. You often walk while you talk, or they're both ways. And I would actually personally love to explore that further, but we don't have time today, so that can be for another chat. Because what we need to discuss is the New South Wales enactment of conversion therapy legislation. So as often is the case, New South Wales are following Victoria, ACT and Queensland. They all have this legislation. WA, I think you've mentioned, will most likely be next. And this legislation, in your words, is an affront to religious freedom. So listeners, what I want you to understand about this legislation is this is what I want you to understand. It seriously restricts the rights of Christian parents to care for their children in accordance with their values and beliefs. The laws, these laws target Christian teachings on sexuality and gender, and they blatantly prioritise controversial ideology over truth. That's what I really need you to understand as the basis for this conversation. So, Steve, in one of your recent articles, you said that truth has a way of outing itself, and that's encouraging. But that being the case, why should we be hot under the collar about this legislation which blatantly promotes a lie if the truth is going to out itself in the end?
Well, I think the truth outs itself by being able to be brought into the public square and spoken about. And part of the issue that you're going to experience is that those things can't be brought into the public square without fear of some sort of prosecution process. What's interesting about the legislation, it's called conversion practices, not therapy, because initially, conversion therapy was a secular psychological approach to, or it was also called aversion therapy, where if there was something that you needed to, some act or habit that you had that you wanted to lose, you could do something that associated that act with something that you didn't like, and you would have aversion towards it at a psychological level. So the idea of using therapy or switching it out to mean practices means it's a coverall for much wider than a psychological process. And I think that's significant in the use of the word practices because it takes it out of the realm of a clinical office and puts it into the realm of everyday life, where it feels muddy and unclear about whether you're crossing the line or not. And to be honest, I think that's the point of the legislation.
Yeah, so in one of the articles that you've written, and you do get published in newspapers as well as your own blog, which I'm very grateful for because it is that voice in the public square, but you challenged particularly evangelical Christians over their lack of response sometimes to these issues. You used the recent pro-life demonstrations outside the New South Wales State Parliament as an example of that. And I share your frustration. I very much agree that churches and Christians in general want to avoid any issue that may see us isolated or scorned or prosecuted. They want to avoid that. But I would say that sometimes evangelical Christians are there, but they're not as easily identifiable because they're not wearing the garb or carrying a cross. And I know organisations such as ACL were front and centre there. But all that being said, it is frustrating that we as Christians want to avoid. We want to focus on the love, and we want to avoid actually confronting the lie. We went and saw The Chosen last week, and I'm still, I'm not sure about The Chosen, but we went and saw it, and it was really good. And Jesus turning over those tables in in the temple courtyard was just so confronting, and he had a whip, and I was like, yeah, he actually did have a whip, and it was very confronting. So, yeah, we have an example there of someone who was righteously angry when God was being mocked. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things we have to understand too with this legislation is that the interpretation of the Act by other organisations who put information out there doesn't always reflect the Act. And the Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, if you read Neil Foster's, he's a great legal blog, Religion and Law Australia, or Law and Religion Australia, he says there's enough grey area that those who have a vested interest in pushing a certain perspective can push it. So the point of the legislation is, I think, and part of it, its greyness in legislative terms, is to get Christians to self-censor. No one wants to jackboot the Christians. It doesn't make good, copy on the front page of the paper. No one wants to jackboot us off the public square. They just want us to self-censor.
Yeah, we jump early. We jump early, don't we? Like in many cases, yeah.
Yeah, and the question is there's a therapeutic pastoral. Is it therapeutic or is it pastoral that's going on? Is it coercive at a Bible study to when someone comes to you and says, look, I've got my whole sexuality framework I think is not godly. I want some prayer for it. Is it coercive control at that point to pray? Is it breaking the law? Who knows? Well, you only know when it's tested. And the whole point of the legislation, I think, is to say to Christians, don't even test it. And I think that's part of a bigger issue about government overreach into religious freedom, freedom of conscience, etc., freedom of association. And I think we have to be very cautious in any setting where those things are pressed upon hard. Is a pastor praying for a person after a Bible study the same as a group that's specifically set up for you to put your sexual identity aside? Those are the big questions that are being asked, I think.
Yeah, I want to just dive a little bit more into that self-censorship, because I think when people are listening today, one of the things I really want them to get out of a conversation such as this is, what should we be doing? What should our reaction be? And I think what we saw in Victoria, which was the first state to have these laws, was some self-censoring by churches. What do you want churches to learn from that in New South Wales, and perhaps people to be thinking about now? What is our reaction going to be? How are we going to actually get on the front foot here?
Say is in our public teaching, so public teaching itself generally is not under the microscope, but I'd want to be able to say to government, actually, if someone comes to me with this question, I want to obey God rather than humans. And a government isn't going to understand that. But sometimes that's just the cost you have to pay as a Christian in this setting. It doesn't mean to say you have to saber rattle and be obnoxious, but you have, your long-term well done, good and faithful servant coming from Jesus is far more important than your well done, good and faithful servant coming from the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board. And I think we have to be it's a challenge to Christians, I think, in Australia and in the rest of the West, who've had a fairly comfortable ride for the last 50 or 60 years. Now, I want to say that there were some coercive techniques, I think, that were unhelpful. But though the issue is a dodo, there is no mainstream Christian organisation that comes close to doing anything like the legislation is prohibiting. It feels almost weird and anachronistic, but I think that's the point. It's laying down a challenge that this is the vision of human flourishing that we have as the state, and we do not want the church to counter that. I think that's what's at the basis of it.
And there's vagaries in the language as well that's being used, I think, that is confusing, perhaps purposefully as well. We've already seen schools in Sydney being hauled before mainstream media because of they've dared to teach about biblical sexuality, not even enforce it, not convert people by it, simply teach it. They've been reading your blogs and you've brought this out. But, this new legislation will actually put it takes it to a next level, doesn't it? And
it does,
The vagaries sometimes confuse us a bit as to what is allowed and what isn't, do you think?
That's the point. Yeah, I think that's the point. And that you see the Victorian there was a YouTube video about the Victorian legislation, which was a cartoon, sort of animation with a lovely Papa Bear voice over the top, and it said coercive techniques could be disguised as prayer. And you go, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that when I'm praying for someone and I'm praying that they're godly in their sexual relationships and how they play out their sexuality, is the person thinking this is a disguised manipulation tool? Well, that's the point of what that video is saying. And I think in Victoria, what you're experiencing at the moment in the Melbourne Diocese of the Anglican Church is that attendance at synod is determined upon whether you'll sign off on the legislation. And I think, that feels like a rollover to me. And I'm not sure. I know Kanishka Raphael, the Archbishop of Sydney, wrote a very good piece last year saying this is designed to be unclear, and it would seem that something with such high prosecution value, up to 5 years jail, should be much clearer, yet it isn't. And here we are a year after the legislation went through Parliament and now it being enacted, no clearer at all. And I, once again, will reiterate, I think that's the point of it.
And for me, as a parent and a grandparent, particularly now as a grandparent, the threat on parents being able to bring up their children without fear of prosecution, teaching them the biblical standards of sexuality, that really hits home to me. So it's a broader issue of freedom of conscience, isn't it? It's not just about sexuality. It's about freedom of conscience. It's about freedom of the whole right that we have as parents to bring up our children according to our values. This is what is actually being threatened as well.
Well, this is what I would say, is that this is a subset of the bigger, what I call the secular age. And if you go to the United States at the moment, everyone is talking about how the vibe shift has changed everything. No, it hasn't. If you go to the state of Colorado at the moment, legislation is going into place that says that is very draconian towards families who don't recognise their child's gender transition, to the point that children can be taken away from parents for supposedly dead naming their children and for refusing to acknowledge the gender change. These are major intrusions into family life, and it's statism at its greatest expression, that the state and the individual are mediated by different institutions, and the primary one is the family. And once the state can determine the morality of the family external to any other restraints, then you've got a problem. And I think that those issues are not going to go away. Whatever the election results in America, the cultural and the political cultural push is definitely in the other direction.
You're right. And this is not something that's out there and a little bit, this is a bit far-fetched. This is actually happening in Australia now. In our schools, in our education system, there are very clear instructions that if a child wants to even have an abortion, or they want to have changed their gender at school, there's a mechanism for them to be able to do that without parental permission. So the state is actually putting themselves as the parent of that child. So we're finding that there are children who are changing their clothing and their name, etc., at school, hopping on the bus and coming back, and their parents are not even aware that that is happening until further down the track, when all of a sudden they're asking to have puberty blockers and hormone therapy. This is frightening for many parents, and it's not out there a weird thing. This is actually happening. Is that right?
Well, yeah, and I could tell you some interesting tales that I know from Western Australia that are much further along the road than that, though by dint of the fact that I can't tell you about them just for privacy.
Yeah.
However, what I think is interesting for us as Christians is that there are many people who are not Christian who are going, what is going on? Does anyone have any alternative to the cultural milieu? And if churches don't go, well, actually, we live by a different ethic and we're prepared to pay the price for holding to that ethic, people bypass what the church is all about. The vision of human flourishing that the culture is giving and the vision of human flourishing that the Bible gives they're no longer sort of running roughly parallel. They're going in different directions. And I think that the whole anxiety about where we're going culturally. Many non-Christians are asking Christian institutions, well, what are you saying about what's right and wrong? And if Christian institutions can't take a hit for that because they think they've got too much invested, they've got too much to lose, then I think that's part of the problem. So it'll be interesting to see how denominations in New South Wales deal with this issue, because in Victoria it feels like people are self-censoring.
So I really appreciate you talking to us, Steve. I think that this is a topic that is just going to get bigger and bigger before it just reveals itself. But if the church would stand up as a bastion of truth in this, they're going to attract so many people because, as you say, I've got friends who are radical feminists who are right on the same page as the biblical explanation of gender on this too. So, Steve, you have a blog. I tried to get lots of B's because I'm a Baptist. So you have a blog, you write books, you do bookings for speaking, but you've also got a podcast, and I couldn't get a B for podcast. So blog, books, bookings, podcast. Yeah. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, it's through your website, StephenMcAlpine.com. That's Stephen, StephenMcAlpine.com. Just, Google him and you'll find him anyway. But we're really grateful to you. I'm personally grateful to you for the truth that you speak in the public space. You make sense and you do it very graciously. So thank you very much, Steve. Thanks for coming on today.
Great to have been with you today, Wendy. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.